Hello again and welcome back to our course on Dreamweaver CC. In the previous section we began our tour of the Dreamweaver Workspace. Apart from looking at the welcome screen and the menu bar in Dreamweaver, we also took a look at panels and workspaces. In this section we're going to look at some other aspects of the Dreamweaver Workspace, but for this we are going to need to create something first. And what we're going to do is to create a new HTML page. HTML is hypertext markup language, and HTML pages traditionally are basically the building blocks of websites. So the very most basic thing you're going to need to be able to do on this course is to create an HTML page. Now there are a number of ways of doing this, and one of them, if you look in the welcome screen there in the middle column, create new, one of the options is HTML. So let's click on HTML. And what we have now is a brand new, completely empty HTML page. Now, if you've ever seen HTML pages before, you may somewhat dispute the fact that this is a completely empty page, as you will see in a moment. I'm going to just type some content into this page, and I'm going to say this is my home page. Now when I type that content, it appears in a default font, in a default size. I'll talk about all those things later on, but I now appear to have some content on my page. But if you look at the buttons immediately above that content, you'll see a set of three buttons together: Code, Split and Design, and a fourth one to the right called Live. And at the moment the Design button is selected. Now to some extent, when the Design button is selected, what you can see is sort of what the page would look like on a website. That isn't quite the case, but it's close to how it would look on a website. But behind the scenes, under the hood if you like, what happened when I created the page and when I typed those words in is that some HTML code was created. And if I want to see what the code is, what I need to do is to click on the Code button. Choose that option instead of Design. What happens if I click on Code? What you can see is, although the words "this is my home page" are there, there's quite a load of content above that and quite a load of content below it, and that is basically HTML code. Now during the course I'm going to be explaining to you what this code does. To some extent you don't really need to worry about it, and you can get along with Dreamweaver pretty well without knowing too much about what all that code means. But as I mentioned right at the start of the course, I suggest that you do get to grips with at least the basics of what this code is and does. However, we'll come back to this particular batch of code a little bit later on. Important thing to remember at the moment is that somebody viewing your page does not by default see the code view. They see the design view, more or less. If you want to see the two views side by side, the middle option, Split, gives you code on the left and design on the right. And if you want to see much more closely how your page would look on your website, you'd actually choose that fourth option, that Live option. But I'm going to come back to Live a little bit later on. We're not actually going to try that at the moment. Now notice that I'm still in split view here, and to the right of the buttons Code, Split, Design, Live, there's a box which says Title. And I'm now going to give this page a title. It's currently by default called Untitled Document, and I'm going to call it Home Page. Now if I call it Home Page and press the Enter key, look carefully at the Code View panel on the left, row 5, the line that's numbered 5. You'll see that the title now says Home Page. When you update the title in the bar there, it actually updates the HTML code. And the HTML code actually holds the vast majority of the information about any page that you are working on. Now sometimes when people start to see HTML code, they think that it looks a bit scary. You may think the same. And people are quite surprised actually that every page you see on the internet basically has HTML code which you can view. Here's the CNN homepage as it is at the time that I'm recording this. If I right click with the mouse on that page and click on View Source, you can see the source of the CNN homepage. It's just loads and loads and loads of HTML. Now, admittedly, it's a little bit bigger than the page that we've created here, but the principles are exactly the same. And of course, on line 5 there, although it's not always on line 5, it says title, CNN.com International, etc. So the basic principle of the HTML code on a web page is the same for an individual web page, for a home page which only has one short line of text on it, as it is for the home page of CNN. Now, one of the things you may have noticed when we created this page is that the welcome page went missing, and you're not really going to need the welcome page again for the moment, but I do want to create a second page. CNN has more than one page, and we're going to have more than one page as well. So what I'm going to do is create a new page in one of the other ways that you can do it. So I'm going up to the File menu item there. One of the options is New, and it has a keyboard shortcut of Control-N. Many commands in Dreamweaver have keyboard shortcuts. Windows keyboard shortcuts are one set, and the Mac shortcuts are another set. In Windows, to create a new page, you can either click New there or choose Control-N. If I click on New, I get a new document dialog which gives me a number of options for what I want a new one of. Now, the top default option is I want a new blank page, and the type of page is HTML and with no layout. Now, the many other options here, we're going to look at several of those during the course, but for the moment we're going to go with the default. I'm going to create a second page. Now, when I create that second page, you can see the existence of two pages because at the top we have now two tabs, and you can switch between the two pages clicking on the tabs. The first one says this is my home page. You can see that on the right there. The second page is currently still empty. Let me put some content on it. Okay, note how as I type that it appears in design view on the right and code view on the left. And now I'm going to give my page a title, but I'm not going to do it in the way that I did it before. I'm going to type the title into the HTML code. So I'm going to position the cursor to the right of the words untitled document in the HTML code. I'm going to delete untitled document, and I'm going to type a title for my page. Now, one thing you may have expected to happen there is that that title would appear in the box in the bar just up there where we saw the title on Untitled 1, the other page. But when you make changes to HTML code, it's very often the case that you have to take a physical action, a refresh action, in order for those changes to be updated elsewhere. Now, I'll tell you more about this later on, but for the moment, if you look right down at the bottom of the screen, there's a little box there. You can just see a little tab that says Properties. And if I click on Properties, what happens is this panel pops up, Code View. You have made changes to the code. To edit selection properties, click Refresh or press F5. F5 is the Windows shortcut for doing a refresh. Look carefully at that title box while I press this refresh button near the bottom. Now you can see that the change I've made in HTML appears elsewhere. And it's quite often the case that you'll need to remember to do a refresh after you've made changes to HTML code. Now you shouldn't worry about that at all, because in many situations Dreamweaver takes care of it for you anyway. But it's something to be aware of, because sometimes I've seen people make a change to HTML code and then be completely baffled by the fact that it hasn't appeared elsewhere. Well, if you get that kind of behavior and you're scratching your head, don't forget that sometimes a refresh can be necessary. So we've got 2 pages and we've got a little bit of content on each page. Let's take a look at some other aspects of the workspace. Now, I've already shown you how to switch between the 2 pages that we're currently working on. Not everybody likes this arrangement with tabs to switch between pages, and if you look over here, there's a little button there right at the right hand end, and you can actually use that to change the situation completely. This button is usually called the Restore Down button, and if I click on the Restore Down button, what you get is 2 different movable windows for the 2 pages that we're working on in this case. Obviously, if you have more than 2 pages, you'd have all of them able to be moved around, and you can overlap them. You can put them basically in any position that you like in the space that's available. If you want to then go back to the tabbed arrangement, all you've got to do is to press the Maximize button within any one of these windows, and we're back to the tabbed arrangement. Now, we looked at this set of buttons up here, Code, Split, Design, a little while ago. These are normally referred to as the View Mode buttons, and they're at the left-hand end of what's called the Document Toolbar. There are 1 or 2 other controls on that Document Toolbar that I haven't looked at. That's one of them. Preview Debug in Browser. If you want to see what your page is going to look like in a browser, you can use that one. There's the title box that we've already looked at here. Very important to draw a distinction between the title of a page and the name of a page. I'll come back to that later as well. And then we have this button, the File Management button, again more later. Now, which buttons you see on the Document Toolbar depend on which view you have in force at that time. It's important to understand what the different views are for. You've seen Design View already. This is what's commonly known as the WYSIWYG view. What you see is what you get, and it gives you a good idea of how your page will appear when it's viewed in a browser. Now, it's a good idea rather than a very accurate representation for a number of reasons, not least of which that there are always some differences between browsers anyway. The other reasons that you get differences are to do with the use of dynamic elements on a page, such as JavaScript, that I'll also be talking about later on as well. But for the moment, with the sort of pages we're creating early on in the course, think of Design View as a way of getting a good representation of what your page would actually look like on your site. Code View and Split View we've also looked at. Live View is the one to use in order to see what your pages will look like when the page does, for example, use JavaScript. Now again, we'll come back to that later on. But for the moment, let me just click on that Live button and show you something else. When you click on that, you get several other controls. And it's very true that the controls you get on the Document Toolbar are very variable, depend on the view that you choose. Another option here is Live Code. Again, things are different. And another option still, Inspect Mode. And we'll look at Inspect Mode later as well. I'm going to switch each of those off and just go back to that split mode that we had before. Now, you probably noticed another toolbar down the left hand side there, and what I'm going to do is to right click on the Document Toolbar and watch what happens. There are in fact 3 main toolbars, and at the moment Document and Coding are enabled, and a third one, Standard, isn't. The bar down the left that I just mentioned is the Coding toolbar, and I can turn these toolbars on and off by clicking the options on that menu. So if I want to see the Standard toolbar, that gives me another toolbar, and this gives you some of the kinds of features that you would normally get in a word processing application. So it's got things like a New button, It's got open, save, save all, paste, undo, and print code. And we'll be using that toolbar later on in the course. Now there are just two other things that I want to show you in the workspace at the moment, and we're going to cover each of these later on in more detail. One of them is the property inspector. We actually used this earlier on to do a refresh, but the property inspector very much depends on what you have selected. So for instance, if I go to the design half of this split view and click within the phrase "this is my home page," the property inspector shows particular, in this case, HTML options at the bottom. If I click on CSS, it shows me CSS information. Now I'll come back to all of that later on. And above that we have the status bar. Now the status bar is also sometimes called the tag selector, and we're going to be talking about HTML tags. But just to give you some idea of what that does and can do for you, if I click body here, it selects the body of my page. If I click, say, within the title in the code half of split view, and then down here click on title, it selects the title. At the right hand edge of the status bar there are some buttons related to different sizes and therefore different views of pages. So we have a mobile size, a tablet size and a desktop size, and these and the numeric settings to their right for window size again we'll be looking at later. So we've done a very quick whistle-stop tour of the Dreamweaver CC workspace. You should have enough information now that we can straight away get into creating a website, and that's what we're going to start in the next section. So please join me for that.